In the scorching heat of a military training ground, where the sound of gunfire echoes like thunder and sweat burns the eyes of every recruit, there's always that one person who seems completely out of place. Someone who doesn't belong in the world of combat boots and barked orders. Someone who makes you wonder how they even made it through the front gates. But what happens when that same person, the one everyone had written off, the one who couldn't stay awake during the most important moments, suddenly becomes the hero nobody saw coming? What happens when a single command from a legendary SEAL commander transforms everything you thought you knew about strength, courage, and what it really means to fight? This is the story of a woman who proved that sometimes the most powerful warriors are the ones nobody expects. Sometimes the person sleeping in the back of the room is actually preparing for the moment that will define not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Get ready for a journey that will challenge everything you believe about what makes a true soldier. Sarah Martinez had never intended to be the worst soldier in her unit. When she first walked through the gates of Fort Bragg for her advanced combat training, she carried herself with the same determination that had gotten her through basic training. Her uniform was pressed, her boots shined to perfection, and her dark hair pulled back in the regulation style that had become second nature. She looked like she belonged there, walking among the other soldiers who had been selected for this elite program. The Advanced Combat Training Program wasn't for everyone. Only the top performers from basic training earned their spot, and Sarah had worked incredibly hard to be there. She remembered the pride in her mother's voice when she called home to share the news. Her father, a veteran himself, had actually gotten emotional when she told him she'd been selected. For a man who rarely showed feelings, those tears meant everything to Sarah. But Fort Bragg was different from anything she had experienced before. The training was intense beyond imagination, designed to push soldiers to their absolute limits, and then keep pushing. The instructors were seasoned veterans who had seen real combat, and they didn't accept anything less than perfection. Every exercise was designed to simulate real battle conditions, and every mistake could mean the difference between life and death in actual combat. Sarah's problem started on the very first day of combat exercises. The morning began at 4:30 with the sharp blast of a whistle that cut through the darkness like a knife. She bolted upright in her narrow bunk, her heart already racing before her feet hit the cold concrete floor. Around her, the other soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing their gear and preparing for what would be a grueling day of training. The first exercise was a tactical assault simulation. The soldiers were divided into teams and given a mission to secure a mock enemy compound. Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Team, led by Sergeant Williams, a tough woman with 15 years of experience and scars that told stories she never shared. The team consisted of 8 soldiers, each with their own specialty and role to play in the mission. As they moved into position, Sarah felt the weight of her gear pressing down on her shoulders. The tactical vest, ammunition, radio equipment, and weapon combined to create a load that seemed to grow heavier with each step. The early morning air was still cool, but she could already feel sweat beginning to form under her helmet. The exercise was supposed to last 4 hours. It was designed to test endurance, tactical thinking, and the ability to work as a team under pressure. Mock explosions would go off around them, creating noise and confusion that simulated real battle conditions. Instructors would play the role of enemy combatants, using paint rounds to eliminate soldiers who made tactical errors. Sarah made it through the first hour without any major problems. Her team moved through the wooded terrain, communicating through hand signals and whispered commands. They successfully navigated several checkpoints and avoided 2 ambush scenarios that eliminated soldiers from other teams. She felt confident and focused, exactly like she imagined a real soldier should feel. But somewhere during the second hour, as her team took cover behind a fallen log to observe the target compound, Sarah felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion wash over her. It wasn't just physical tiredness, though the weight of her gear and the intensity of the exercise certainly contributed. It was something deeper, a bone-deep weariness that seemed to come from nowhere. She tried to fight it, blinking hard and shaking her head to clear the fog that was settling over her thoughts. But as Sergeant Williams outlined their next move in whispered tones, Sarah found her eyelids growing impossibly heavy. The sounds of the exercise seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a distant humming that grew louder and more insistent. The next thing Sarah knew, she was being shaken awake by Corporal Johnson, whose face showed a mixture of concern and frustration. Around her, the rest of Alpha Team was staring with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright anger. Sergeant Williams was speaking into her radio, her voice tight with controlled fury. Sarah had fallen asleep during a combat exercise, not just dozed off for a few seconds, but fallen into such a deep sleep that she had been completely unaware of her surroundings for over 20 minutes. During that time, her team had been eliminated from the exercise when they were forced to move without adequate cover because they were one person short. The walk back to base was the longest of Sarah's life. Nobody spoke to her, but she could feel the weight of their disappointment and anger. These were soldiers who took their training seriously, who understood that the skills they learned here could mean the difference between life and death for themselves and their brothers and sisters in arms. By falling asleep, Sarah had not only failed herself, but had potentially endangered her entire team. Commander Richards was waiting for them when they returned. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. He had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and his reputation for toughness was legendary throughout the base. When he looked at Sarah, she felt like he was examining every failure and weakness she had ever had. The debriefing was brutal, but fair. Commander Richards went through each team's performance, highlighting both successes and failures. When he got to Alpha Team, his voice took on a harder edge as he described how they had been eliminated due to being one soldier short during a critical movement. He didn't name Sarah specifically, but everyone in the room knew exactly who he was talking about. After the group debriefing, Commander Richards asked Sarah to stay behind. When the room was empty except for the two of them, he sat on the edge of the desk and studied her for a long moment before speaking. His words were measured and careful, but they hit Sarah like physical blows. He talked about the responsibility that came with being a soldier, about the trust that team members placed in each other, and about the consequences of failure in real combat situations. He wasn't cruel or unnecessarily harsh, but his disappointment was clear. Sarah tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. She talked about being tired, about the weight of the gear, about not getting enough sleep the night before. Commander Richards listened without interrupting, but his expression never changed. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before asking her a simple question that would haunt her for weeks to come. He asked if she thought she was cut out for this kind of work. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Sarah realized she didn't have a good answer. She had always wanted to be a soldier, had always believed she had what it took to serve her country. But sitting in that room, facing the disappointed stare of a man she respected more than almost anyone, she began to wonder if she had been wrong about herself all along. The rest of that first week followed a similar pattern. Sarah would start each exercise with determination and focus, but somewhere during the intense training, exhaustion would overwhelm her. It wasn't that she was out of shape or lazy. Her physical fitness scores were actually above average, and she had no problem with the running, push-ups, or other physical requirements of military life. But there was something about the combination of stress, physical exertion, and intense concentration required during combat exercises that seemed to trigger an almost narcoleptic response. She would find herself fighting to stay awake during briefings, nodding off while on watch duty, and even falling asleep while standing up during formation. Her fellow soldiers began to notice, and their initial sympathy quickly turned to frustration and then to outright hostility. In the military, trust is everything. Soldiers need to know that they can count on each other completely, without reservation or doubt. Sarah's inability to stay awake during crucial moments made her a liability, and her teammates began to see her as a danger to their safety and success. The nicknames started during the second week. At first, they were relatively harmless, Sleeping Beauty or Snooze. But as Sarah's problem persisted and began to affect more exercises, the names became crueler and more cutting. Dead Weight was one that particularly stung, as did Liability Lopez, a reference to her Hispanic heritage that added an uncomfortable racial element to the harassment. Sarah tried everything she could think of to solve the problem. She went to bed earlier, changed her diet, increased her caffeine intake, and even tried various supplements that other soldiers recommended. Nothing worked. If anything, her problems seemed to be getting worse as the stress of the training and the social isolation from her peers took their toll on her mental health. The medical evaluation she requested provided no answers. The base doctor ran several tests and found nothing physically wrong with her. Her blood work was normal, she showed no signs of sleep disorders, and her overall health was excellent. The doctor suggested that stress might be a factor, but offered no real solutions beyond the standard advice to get more sleep and reduce caffeine intake. By the end of the third week, Sarah was seriously considering requesting a transfer out of the program. She had gone from being excited about the opportunity to dreading each new day. Her confidence was shattered, her relationships with her fellow soldiers were strained or non-existent, and she was beginning to believe that maybe she really wasn't cut out for military service. The breaking point came during a night exercise designed to test the soldiers' ability to operate in low-light conditions. Sarah's team was tasked with conducting a reconnaissance mission on an enemy position, gathering intelligence while remaining undetected. It required moving silently through dense woods, using night vision equipment, and maintaining constant communication with the command post. Sarah lasted exactly 47 minutes before falling asleep while hiding behind a tree, waiting for her turn to observe the target through night vision goggles. This time, her snoring actually gave away the team's position to the opposing forces, resulting in their immediate capture and elimination from the exercise. The aftermath was devastating. Sergeant Williams, who had been one of Sarah's few remaining supporters, finally lost her patience completely. In front of the entire unit, she told Sarah that she was dangerous to work with and that she had no business being a soldier if she couldn't stay awake when lives depended on it. Other soldiers began openly questioning why Sarah was still in the program. Some suggested she was faking her sleep issues to get out of difficult training. Others wondered if she had some kind of mental problem that made her unfit for service. A few of the crueler individuals started betting on how long it would take before she was kicked out of the program entirely. Sarah felt completely alone and utterly defeated. She had dreamed of serving her country since she was a child, inspired by her father's stories and her own sense of patriotic duty. Now that dreams seemed to be crumbling around her, destroyed by a problem she couldn't understand or control. That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the whispered conversations of her fellow soldiers, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her life. She decided to request a meeting with Commander Richards to formally withdraw from the program. She would go back to regular Army duties, accept whatever assignment they gave her, and try to find a way to serve her country that didn't require her to stay awake during combat situations. But fate had other plans for Sarah Martinez. Unknown to her, Commander Richards had been watching her struggle with growing interest rather than disappointment. He had seen many soldiers come and go during his years of service, and he had learned to recognize the difference between someone who was lazy or uncommitted and someone who was dealing with a genuine problem beyond their control. More importantly, he had begun to suspect that Sarah's issue might actually be related to something much more significant than simple fatigue or stress. Her pattern of falling asleep during high-stress situations reminded him of something he had encountered before during his time working with Special Operations Forces. It was a rare condition, but one that could actually indicate hidden strengths rather than weaknesses. Commander Richards had also been paying attention to Sarah's performance in areas outside of the combat exercises. Her marksmanship scores were exceptional, her written tests showed superior tactical understanding, and her leadership potential was obvious during the few exercises where she managed to stay awake. There was clearly more to this soldier than met the eye. As Sarah prepared to end her military dreams, Commander Richards was preparing to begin an experiment that would either prove his theory correct or end Sarah's career once and for all. He had an idea, based on years of experience and a deep understanding of how the human mind responds to extreme stress. If he was right about Sarah, she might not be the worst soldier in the unit after all. She might actually be one of the best. The morning Sarah planned to request her withdrawal from the program. She found a note on her bunk that changed everything. The handwriting was precise and military in its efficiency, written on official letterhead that immediately caught her attention. Commander Richards was requesting a private meeting with her at 1400 hours that afternoon. The note gave no indication of the meeting's purpose, but Sarah's stomach dropped as she read it. She spent the day in a state of nervous anxiety, barely able to concentrate on the morning's physical training exercises. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. She assumed Commander Richards had finally decided to remove her from the program himself, sparing her the humiliation of having to quit voluntarily. The thought brought both relief and devastating disappointment. When 1400 hours arrived, Sarah stood outside Commander Richards' office, her hand raised to knock on the door. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would accept his decision with dignity, and request a transfer to a position where she could still serve effectively. She had even prepared an apology for the time and resources that had been wasted on her training. The office was exactly what she expected from a man of Commander Richards' reputation. The walls were lined with commendations, photographs from various deployments, and a collection of unit patches that told the story of a distinguished military career. Behind his desk hung a flag that had been flown during his last tour in Afghanistan, and the bookshelf was filled with military strategy texts and leadership manuals. Commander Richards gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk, but instead of the serious, disappointed expression she expected, his face showed something that looked almost like curiosity. He studied her for a moment before speaking, his words careful and measured. He began by acknowledging what they both knew, that her performance during combat exercises had been problematic and that her sleeping issues were affecting not just her own training, but the effectiveness of her entire unit. Sarah nodded, preparing herself for what she assumed would come next. But instead of dismissal or criticism, Commander Richards asked her an unexpected question. He wanted to know about her background, her motivation for joining the military, and her goals for her service. Sarah found herself talking about her father's influence, her desire to serve her country, and her frustration with her current situation. Commander Richards listened without interrupting, occasionally asking follow-up questions that seemed designed to understand her character rather than judge her performance. Then, he asked about her sleep patterns outside of combat exercises. Did she have trouble sleeping in her regular bunk? Did she fall asleep during classroom instruction or other non-combat activities? Sarah realized as she answered that the sleeping problem was specific to high-stress, combat-related situations. During regular duties, lectures, or even physical training, she had no trouble staying alert and focused. Commander Richards leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He explained that he had been observing her for several weeks, not just during the exercises where she failed, but during all aspects of her training. Her marksmanship scores were in the top 5% of her class. Her written examinations showed an exceptional understanding of military tactics and strategy. Her physical fitness ratings were above average, and her leadership potential was evident during the few group exercises where she managed to stay awake. What he had noticed, he explained, was that Sarah's sleeping episodes seemed to occur specifically during situations that would trigger an extreme stress response in most people. The combination of physical danger, intense pressure, and life-or-death decision-making appeared to cause her nervous system to shut down rather than ramp up. It was as if her body's natural fight-or-flight response was wired backward. Commander Richards had seen this before, though rarely. During his time working with Special Operations Forces, he had encountered a handful of individuals who exhibited similar responses to extreme stress. In most cases, these soldiers were removed from combat roles because their condition made them unreliable in traditional military situations. But Commander Richards had also learned something interesting about these individuals. While they couldn't function in conventional high-stress scenarios, they often possessed extraordinary abilities in specific types of situations. Their nervous systems, which shut down under immediate physical threat, sometimes proved to be exceptionally well-suited for different kinds of pressure altogether. He asked Sarah if she would be willing to participate in an experimental training program. It would be different from anything she had experienced so far, designed specifically to work with her unique stress response rather than against it. The program would be intense and demanding in its own way, but it might reveal abilities she didn't know she possessed. Sarah was confused but intrigued. She had expected to be dismissed from the program, not offered an alternative. She asked what kind of training he was talking about, and Commander Richards explained that it would focus on intelligence gathering, surveillance, and infiltration rather than direct combat. These roles required different skills and a different type of mental toughness than traditional soldier training. The key difference, he explained, was that these roles often required the ability to remain calm and undetected in stressful situations for extended periods. Instead of the immediate action and split-second decision-making required in combat, intelligence work demanded patience, observation skills, and the ability to think clearly under sustained pressure. Commander Richards had a theory that Sarah's tendency to become drowsy during high-stress situations might actually be a form of natural camouflage, a way for her nervous system to enter a state of hyper-aware calm rather than hyperactive alertness. If he was right, this could make her exceptionally suited for certain types of covert operations. Sarah agreed to try the experimental program, partly because she had nothing to lose, and partly because Commander Richards' explanation had given her the first glimmer of hope she had felt in weeks. Maybe she wasn't fundamentally broken or unsuited for military service. Maybe she just needed to find the right role for her particular abilities. The new training began immediately. Instead of reporting for combat exercises with her regular unit, Sarah was assigned to work with Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, a specialist in intelligence operations who had spent most of her career in roles that couldn't be discussed in detail. Lieutenant Colonel Santos was a small, quiet woman whose unremarkable appearance was exactly the kind of asset that made her perfect for covert work. The first exercise was completely different from anything Sarah had experienced. Instead of tactical assault or combat simulation, she was given a surveillance assignment. Her task was to observe a mock enemy facility from a concealed position for 8 hours, documenting all activity and identifying key personnel and security procedures. The assignment required her to remain motionless and alert for an extended period, something that should have triggered her sleep response immediately. But as Sarah settled into her hiding spot among the trees overlooking the target facility, something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting off drowsiness, she found herself entering a state of relaxed awareness that felt completely natural. Hours passed without her feeling the overwhelming fatigue that had plagued her during combat exercises. She remained alert and focused, meticulously documenting every detail of the activity below. Her observations were detailed and accurate, noting patterns and details that would prove crucial for planning any kind of operation against the facility. When the exercise ended, Lieutenant Colonel Santos reviewed Sarah's report with obvious satisfaction. The level of detail and accuracy was exceptional, showing an ability to maintain focus and observe important details that many experienced intelligence operatives would struggle to match. The next exercise was even more challenging. Sarah was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy compound during a social gathering, blending in with civilians while gathering specific intelligence about security procedures and personnel. It required her to remain calm and natural while surrounded by potential threats, maintaining her cover while simultaneously conducting covert surveillance. Again, Sarah found herself entering a state of calm alertness that felt completely different from the panic and exhaustion she experienced during combat training. She moved through the crowd with natural ease, engaging in casual conversation while mentally cataloging security details and identifying key personnel. Her ability to appear relaxed and uninteresting while conducting sophisticated intelligence work proved to be exceptional. Over the following weeks, Sarah's training intensified and diversified. She learned advanced surveillance techniques, infiltration methods, and communication procedures. She studied psychology, cultural awareness, and language skills. Each assignment built on the previous one, gradually developing her abilities in areas she had never imagined pursuing. What amazed everyone, including Sarah herself, was how naturally these skills came to her. The same nervous system that shut down during direct combat scenarios seemed perfectly adapted for the patient, sustained pressure of intelligence work. She could remain motionless and alert for hours during surveillance operations, maintain perfect composure during infiltration exercises, and process complex information while under sustained psychological pressure. Lieutenant Colonel Santos became increasingly impressed with Sarah's progress. Her natural ability to blend into various environments was exceptional, and her observational skills were among the best Santos had seen in 15 years of intelligence work. More importantly, Sarah's unique stress response, which had been such a liability in combat training, proved to be a significant asset in covert operations. Commander Richards checked in on Sarah's progress regularly, and each report confirmed his initial theory. Sarah's nervous system wasn't defective or broken. It was simply wired for a different type of military service than traditional combat roles. Her ability to maintain calm awareness under sustained pressure made her potentially invaluable for intelligence and special operations work. But the real test came during a complex, multi-day exercise designed to simulate a real-world intelligence mission. Sarah was assigned to infiltrate a mock enemy organization, maintain cover for several days while gathering specific intelligence, and extract herself without being detected. The exercise involved multiple variables, potential complications, and the kind of sustained pressure that would challenge even experienced operatives. Sarah spent days preparing for the assignment, studying her cover identity, memorizing operational procedures, and planning for various contingencies. When the exercise began, she found herself completely in her element for the first time since arriving at Fort Bragg. She successfully established her cover identity, gained access to the target organization, and began gathering the required intelligence. For 3 days, she maintained perfect composure while surrounded by potential threats, conducting covert surveillance while appearing to be nothing more than a new employee learning her job. The information she gathered exceeded all expectations. Not only did she obtain all the required intelligence objectives, but she also discovered additional security vulnerabilities and operational details that hadn't been part of her original mission. Her ability to observe and remember minute details while maintaining natural behavior was extraordinary. More importantly, throughout the entire exercise, Sarah never experienced the drowsiness or fatigue that had plagued her during combat training. Instead, she felt energized and focused, as if she had finally found the type of work her mind and body were designed to do. When the exercise concluded, the evaluation team was unanimous in their praise. Sarah had not only completed her mission successfully, but had demonstrated skills that exceeded those of operatives with years of experience. Her natural ability to blend in, observe without being noticed, and maintain perfect composure under pressure made her a potential asset for the most sensitive types of operations. Commander Richards was vindicated in his theory, but more importantly, Sarah had discovered her true calling within military service. She wasn't a failure or a liability. She was simply a soldier who needed to find the right role for her unique abilities. But the most significant test was yet to come. Sarah's success in intelligence training had attracted attention from higher levels of command, including the special operations community. There was talk of transferring her to advanced programs that would utilize her skills in ways she couldn't yet imagine. However, before any of these opportunities could be pursued, an unexpected crisis would arise that would test not just Sarah's new skills, but her fundamental character as a soldier. A real-world situation would develop that would require her to draw upon everything she had learned, pushing her abilities to their absolute limit and proving once and for all whether her transformation from liability to asset was complete. The woman who had once dozed through every combat exercise was about to face a challenge that would determine not just her own future, but potentially the safety of her fellow soldiers. The sleeping soldier was about to wake up in ways she had never imagined possible. 3 months into Sarah's intelligence training, Fort Bragg received an urgent communication that would change everything. A routine training exercise at a remote facility had gone terribly wrong, and 12 soldiers were trapped in a situation that was rapidly becoming a real-world crisis. The mock enemy compound being used for the exercise had been infiltrated by actual hostile forces, and what had started as a simulation was now a genuine hostage situation. The details were sketchy and constantly changing, but the basic facts were clear enough to cause alarm throughout the base. A group of soldiers conducting a night training exercise at the Woodland Training Facility had encountered armed intruders who had apparently been using the remote location for their own illegal activities. The soldiers had been taken captive, and the hostiles were now barricaded in the facility with no clear demands or communication attempts. Local law enforcement was involved, but the remote location and the military nature of the situation meant that Fort Bragg would likely need to take the lead in resolving the crisis. The problem was that standard tactical approaches might put the captured soldiers at even greater risk, especially since the hostiles appeared to be well-armed and familiar with the facility layout. Commander Richards found himself in the middle of an emergency briefing with senior officers, trying to develop a response plan that could resolve the situation without getting anyone killed. The Woodland Training Facility was a complex arrangement of buildings and terrain features designed to simulate various combat scenarios. It included mock urban environments, rural compounds, and wilderness areas that could be configured to represent almost any operational setting. The facility's complexity, which made it perfect for training exercises, now worked against them. The hostiles had chosen their position well, with multiple escape routes, good defensive positions, and complete familiarity with the terrain after apparently using it as a base of operations for some time. Traditional tactical approaches were problematic for several reasons. A direct assault would almost certainly result in casualties among both the hostages and the assault team. The hostiles had demonstrated that they were well-armed and willing to use violence, and they had chosen defensive positions that would make any frontal attack extremely costly. Negotiation was also complicated by the fact that the hostiles had made no demands and had refused all attempts at communication. They seemed content to maintain their position indefinitely, which suggested they either had a planned extraction method or were prepared for a siege situation. As the briefing continued, Commander Richards found his thoughts turning to Sarah Martinez and her unique abilities. The situation was exactly the type of challenge that might benefit from her particular skills: prolonged pressure, the need for patience and observation, and the requirement to gather intelligence without being detected. He suggested that they consider an intelligence-gathering mission to supplement their tactical planning. If they could get detailed information about the hostiles' positions, weapons, and intentions, it might be possible to develop a more effective approach to resolving the crisis. The suggestion was initially met with skepticism, as the other officers questioned who could possibly conduct such a mission under the current circumstances. Commander Richards explained his idea carefully. Sarah's training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. Her ability to remain undetected while conducting surveillance, combined with her exceptional observational skills, might allow her to gather crucial intelligence that could save lives on both sides of the conflict. The response was immediate and negative. Several officers pointed out that Sarah was still in training, that she had no real-world experience, and that sending an untested operative into such a dangerous situation would be irresponsible. They questioned whether someone who had struggled so badly in combat training could possibly be trusted with such a critical mission. But Commander Richards had spent enough time observing Sarah's progress to believe in her abilities. He argued that her unique stress response, which had been such a liability in combat situations, might actually be perfect for this type of covert operation. Her ability to remain calm and focused under sustained pressure could allow her to gather information that more traditionally trained operatives might miss. The debate continued for over an hour, with various tactical options being proposed and discarded. Direct assault remained too risky. Negotiation seemed impossible, and waiting for the situation to resolve itself could result in harm to the hostages. Finally, the senior officer in charge made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. They would attempt a multi-phase approach. A negotiation team would continue trying to establish communication while tactical teams prepared for various contingencies. Simultaneously, they would authorize a limited intelligence-gathering mission to supplement their information about the situation. Sarah Martinez would be given the opportunity to prove herself in the most challenging circumstances possible. The decision was controversial, but the urgency of the situation left little room for extended debate. Every hour that passed increased the risk to the hostages, and they needed more information to make informed decisions about how to proceed. Sarah was called into an emergency briefing that evening, still unaware of the developing crisis. When Commander Richards explained the situation and the proposed mission, she felt a mixture of terror and excitement that was unlike anything she had experienced before. This was no longer training or simulation. This was real, with genuine stakes and potential consequences that went far beyond her own career. The mission was straightforward in concept, but extraordinarily challenging in execution. Sarah would infiltrate the area around the Woodland Training Facility, conduct surveillance to determine the hostiles' positions and capabilities, and gather any intelligence that might help resolve the situation safely. She would work alone, with no backup or support, relying entirely on her training and abilities. The briefing team provided her with all available information about the facility layout, the known positions of hostiles and hostages, and the communication procedures she would use to report her findings. She was given specialized surveillance equipment, including night vision devices, long-range photography equipment, and secure communication gear. Most importantly, she was given a clear understanding of the mission's limitations and expectations. She was not authorized to take any direct action to resolve the situation. Her role was strictly intelligence gathering, and she was under strict orders to avoid detection and extraction immediately if she was compromised. The preparation took most of the night. Sarah studied satellite photographs of the facility, memorized the locations of all known buildings and terrain features, and planned multiple approach and extraction routes. She prepared her equipment, tested her communication gear, and reviewed emergency procedures until she could execute them automatically. As dawn approached, Sarah found herself in the back of a military vehicle being transported to a position several miles from the Woodland Training Facility. She would cover the remaining distance on foot, approaching the facility from an unexpected direction that would hopefully allow her to avoid detection by the hostiles. The terrain between her drop-off point and the facility was challenging, dense forest broken by small clearings, with several streams and ridgelines that would need to be crossed carefully. The approach would take several hours and would require her to move slowly and carefully to avoid making noise that might alert the hostiles to her presence. As Sarah began her approach, she felt the familiar sensation of calm focus that had become her trademark during intelligence training. Instead of the panic and fatigue that had plagued her during combat exercises, she experienced a heightened awareness that seemed to make every detail of her surroundings crystal clear. She moved through the forest with careful precision, using techniques she had learned during her training to minimize noise and avoid leaving obvious tracks. Every few hundred meters, she would stop to listen and observe, ensuring that she hadn't been detected and that she was still following the optimal route to her target. The morning passed slowly as Sarah worked her way toward the facility. She crossed 2 streams by finding fallen logs that would support her weight without creating splashes, navigated around several clearings where she would have been visible to observation, and carefully climbed 2 ridgelines that provided better concealment than the valley routes. By early afternoon, she had reached a position where she could observe the Woodland Training Facility through her binoculars. What she saw immediately confirmed that the situation was as serious as the briefings had indicated. Armed figures were visible at several positions around the facility, and their equipment and positioning suggested they were experienced and well-prepared for a prolonged confrontation. Sarah spent the next several hours conducting detailed surveillance from multiple positions around the facility perimeter. She photographed the hostiles' positions, counted their numbers, identified their weapons, and observed their movement patterns. She also managed to locate where the hostages were being held and noted the security arrangements that were in place. Most importantly, she discovered something that the intelligence briefings had missed. The hostiles had positioned several individuals outside the main facility perimeter, creating an early warning system that would detect any traditional tactical approach. These outer positions were well concealed and would have been nearly impossible to spot from satellite imagery or casual observation. As evening approached, Sarah had gathered enough intelligence to significantly improve the tactical team's understanding of the situation. She had identified the locations of all hostile positions, counted their numbers and weapons, mapped their security arrangements, and observed their behavioral patterns throughout the day. But, as she prepared to extract and report her findings, she noticed something that would change everything. One of the outer security positions was being abandoned as the hostiles consolidated their forces for what appeared to be preparation for a nighttime defensive stand. If she could get closer to the main facility during this transition, she might be able to gather even more critical intelligence. The decision to extend her mission was risky, but Sarah felt confident in her abilities and recognized the value of the additional information she might obtain. She waited until full darkness before beginning a careful approach to a position much closer to the facility than she had originally planned to attempt. Moving through the darkness using night vision equipment, Sarah found herself within a few hundred meters of the main building where the hostages were being held. From this position, she could observe not just the hostiles' defensive positions but also details about the hostages' condition and the specific security measures being used to contain them. What she discovered during this closer surveillance would prove to be the key to resolving the entire situation. The hostiles were not the sophisticated, well-organized force that their initial positioning had suggested. They were actually a small group of criminals who had been using the training facility as a base for drug operations and had panicked when surprised.